Professor Dave kind of looks like Biden.
You kind of look like Biden.
I don't have a confused expression.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to going to be an interesting episode of Faith Unaltered. I'm just one of the handsome co-hosts you see with you this evening. My name is Tyler Fowler. With me is Joshua Davidson, David Russell, and Dale Glover. Somebody's messing with me, putting me in the wrong spot. Like, I don't understand these people. They're going to get fired here pretty soon if they don't quit. But with that being said, gentlemen, welcome. What is going on, guys?
Not much. Just having a slower Friday. It was a good week. I ended up having to do computer training today, so it was a slower day for me today.
Okay. What's up, Dale?
Yeah, I've only had one podcast this week. I forget what it was. Was that the one I did with? Did I do that with you, Tyler? Or I forget now. But
man, I don't know. Yes, we did. What was it about? I forget.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank too. But other than that,
dumb.
That was it. So I've kind of had a slow week, but I really enjoyed the presidential debate last night. That was
I just watched it.
Yeah, some great times.
Train wreck. It was a train wreck, an absolute disaster fire. Like, that would be if, like, me and David got on here debating Eastern Orthodoxy and Protestantism, and all we said the entire time was, "Nuh-uh, you're wrong. Nuh-uh, mine's the best. Nuh-uh, mine's the best. You're a liar. Absolute fabrication."
Malarkey.
Malarkey, yeah.
I'm gonna have to remember that word for David Russell whenever he says something tonight.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Come on, man.
Yeah. Anyway, train wreck, but good thing we're not a political show, right? But we are going to be responding. So that was, I like that, Dale. That was a good segue up into what I'm about to say. So though that was filled with some very, very cringy things that were said, we're going to be looking at some cringy things that were said, but it's not by former President Trump or quote unquote President Biden. We're going to be looking at things said by Professor Dave Farina, Joe Rogan, Terrance Howard, and AJ Gentile from the Y-Files. And so all of these guys have one thing in common, and that is they've said some kind of silly things. We're going to start out very, very kind of shallow on the shallow end. I'm not saying what most of these guys say has any deep kind of connotations whatsoever, but I do respect AJ a lot more than I respect everybody else that we're going to be looking at tonight. Just simply because AJ doesn't have that, I hate Christian type persona, right? And I don't know if Joe or Terrance or Professor Dave hates Christians or whatever, but they say a lot of negative things and can be really, really rude about it sometimes. And so I don't want to give off that effect. Tonight, I want to address these guys in love and respect, but I will say that I do respect AJ a lot more than any of the other guys that we're going to look at tonight. And so that's where we're going to start. And look at a little statement that was made about hell. We're going to talk about the Terrance Howard and Joe Rogan interview where Terrance said things like Jesus said that we're all gods and this, that, and the other. And then we'll wrap up with Professor Dave talking about how Hebrew mythology, quote unquote, stole from ancient Mesopotamian mythology and ancient Sumer specifically. And so, David, I know you didn't get a chance to let us know how your week's going, brother. How you doing?
Man, it's been a rough one, I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie. Yeah. It's pretty drained physically, emotionally, and spiritually as well. A lot of stuff going on in there.
It happens, dude. It happens to all of us. Like we were just talking before we came on, right? And all Christians, no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, no matter where your walk is with Christ, we struggle sometimes. We get down. And sometimes sin kind of manifests itself. I'm not saying that's what happened with you. You're definitely fighting a spiritual war, and prayers with you, my friend. But it's something that we all do. So if I could give anybody anything, just a piece of advice, a practical piece of advice, is don't think that you're alone, because you're not. We all struggle with this. Everyone, I don't care who they are, the biggest name in Christianity struggles with sin. And so don't feel like you're alone. And if you need somebody to talk to, reach out, faithunaltered@gmail.com. And every one of these guys, except for Dale, we're trying to talk him into it, but has social media, Facebook, so you can reach us there. But other than that, guys, is there anything else? Dale, I saw you on mute. You wanna come back to that real quick?
No, I was just waiting. You mentioned my name, so I was like, okay, maybe he's gonna call me in or something. But
no.
Yeah, I mean, I have been expanding. Like I said, I've got the Patreon now, and
you do
that kind of stuff, and so I'm posting shows up on that. Tyler knows about that from my logic course. Maybe I'll give you an endorsement. I don't know, but
I endorse your logic, Dale. I definitely endorse your class, and I think that people should sign up just to take that class. And it's not expensive. It's going to be cheaper than going to seminary or going to a college or anything like that. Like, you pay, what is it, Dale? What's your high tier subscribers payment a month?
I think it's about $20 a month for the course kind of thing, right? So
super cheap to get. And Dale, you are a philosophy professor. I mean, that's what you've done. So like, people are getting really good stuff in grade A. It's just like taking a philosophy course at a college. Dale's teaching it. He has slides. He goes in depth, logical fallacies. So if that's the kind of thing that you're into, I endorse it 100%.
So basically, if you want to see how wrong somebody can be, watch Dale's.
Well, there you go. There you go. Take the fallacies and apply them to your daily life. And anyone it could be wrong. I did a little bit with the presidential debate, and I lost track after like 20, I think it was. But other than that, it was an interesting time. So you can learn a lot from Dale. Dale, is there anything you want to say on that before we get started and kick this first video off?
Just want to say, what a load of malarkey from David Russell. This is coming from the guy who doesn't know what a hypothetical syllogism is. And
all right, before we get into any more of that nonsense, so I just want to shout out to the people watching right now, and one in particular. I don't know what this name is, but I absolutely love it. Guba Nub Nub Duraka.
That's pretty good.
Oh my God, yeah.
That's
an
pretty
interesting
good.
one. So you win the internet tonight, sir, or ma'am. I don't know. But thank you for being here. And yes, I agree. Amen. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on us. Amen.
That should be pronounced Gubba, I think.
Gubba Nub Nub. I don't think he cares, like, how you pronounce it. Like, it's just Gubba Gubba Numa. Anyway. All right. And yes, 1 × 1 = 2, according to Terry Howard. So anyway, that's the kind of stuff we're going to be getting into, guys, tonight. So please if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, and share this content. I think it's going to be really fun, and it's going to be really good. And so let's get into it. And also, if you have any questions for us, please feel free to ask at Faith Unaltered in the chat, and also super chats, as always, get priority. So with that being said, let's go. So this first one is from the Y-Files. Again, AJ, I love AJ to death. So I watch Y-Files religiously. And most of his stuff, I find it very, very interesting, very, very good. I love Hecklefish. Like, he's got a little sidekick So I don't know if anybody's ever seen Y-Files or not. They've got like, I don't know, I think it's between 1 and 3 million subscribers. I haven't looked at it recently, but it's definitely something to that effect. So they're a big name channel, and I think AJ is doing some awesome stuff over there. But he did say something in this video where he's talking about how different ancient religions, specifically like, well, he's going to name them off here in just a second, but how they have this concept of the underworld. And though I agree with most of what he says here, if you apply it to like Dante's Inferno type hell, okay, I would agree. But the concept of eternal punishment goes back before Jesus ever walked the face of the earth. And I've got some not clips, I've got them on my phone and sources. So if y'all are got a pen and paper and want to write these down and look them up later, I'm not going to show anything. I'm just going to cite the sources and read the text. And then I'll bring these other guys in here to comment on this as well. But this is who we got up first. So it's AJ Gentile from the Y-Files. And guys, here we go. And this is from, his compilation, Ancient Mysteries, Volume 1.
Celtic Irish. They all have myths of an underground world. More modern myths may call this place hell, but it could be argued that hell is a relatively new concept, that it's a construct designed to create fear and inspire good behavior. But before the concept...
Okay, so I want to back this up actually just a little bit to get who he's all talking about here. There we go, right there. Okay.
And connected to the surface by a vast tunnel network within the planet's crust. Indian religions speak of a place called Patala, which translates to that which is below the feet. Patala is described as a beautiful land full of rolling green hills and crystal clear lakes. Agartha is described the same way. Some believe this is the real Garden of Eden, that when God cast Adam and Eve out of the garden, he actually sent them to the surface. In an ancient Mayan text called the Popol Vuh, there is the story of Xibalba, an underworld civilization. And from Xibalba, twin brothers emerge, and like Adam and Eve, they became the first people above ground. Chico-Mazatec is the place where the Aztecs emerged to live on the surface of the earth. It translates to 7 caves, and researchers are actually looking for it, and some think they found it. African and other Native American legends also mention subterranean realms and cavern spirits. The most consistent story is that of an advanced inner Earth civilization isolated from surface humanity. The Sumerians knew it as Kur, a void space or home of the dead. The Babylonians called it Urkala, another world ruled by gods. The Chinese call this underworld Diyu, and the Japanese call it Yomi. Ancient Egypt, Islam, Greek, Rome, even Celtic Irish. They all have myths of an underground world. More modern myths may call this place hell, but it could be argued that hell is a relatively new concept, that it's a construct designed to create fear and inspire good behavior. But before the concept of hell, the underworld was inhabited by advanced, godlike people who came to the surface of the earth.
All right. And that's where we are going to stop. And so, with that being said, Josh, do you want to say anything before we dive into the text that proved this statement wrong? Go ahead.
I, as far as what you're diving into, I would say it's probably more pinpointed at the overall point. But the thing that he said that really stuck in my ears just now, was actually to conceptually invert Eden and say it's not the height of creation, the place where creation touches God's toes, let's say, something like that, where God can reach down. He communed with them and walked with them in the cool of the day in this place. Instead, he says it's the place underground. In fact, the underworld, what we would call Sheol or Hades. That was Eden. That was Paradiso. And when God expelled Adam and Eve, it was evidently from the grave rather than from the mountaintop, which is incredibly deep and symbolic in the weirdest and most backhanded way. And so I'm struck by the fact that he said that, but in a certain sense, it's interesting that what I think he has mistaken, the intuition that he has mistaken, is actually what we understand the resurrection to be. Rather than Adam and Eve being expelled from that place, Christ broke out of that place. So, yeah, take that, devil.
I thought that whenever I first heard that, it didn't resonate with me. but now that you're here and that we just listened to it again, I heard that, and it's like the inversion concept that you've talked about on Cosmic Corner, however many times we've talked about it on Faith Unaltered, and I figured that would stick with you, and I thought that's what you were going to comment on, but good job, good catch, so I appreciate that. Dale, go ahead.
I just want to add on about that inversion, because there's also with that story of Adam and Eve, again, I'm assuming he's accepting the fall and stuff like that, so it's almost like the fall. By rebelling against God, we go from death to life. It's the exact opposite. Right. So that's one thing that I caught with the inversion there. Another thing that I caught that was interesting is so he has this, he's confusing hell with Sheol, which is just the abode of the dead in the earliest Old Testament period. It's for both good and bad. Everyone that dies goes there, right? And I mean, everyone has these legends, but he cites various notions of kind of a realm of the dead or an underworld and how it's common to everyone. So I don't know if his point, because I haven't seen his show, but if he's trying to imply, well, look, they're copying, obviously the Jews and the Hebrews are copying this idea. Well, what about the Chinese, or he's citing North American cultures? They all independently
Islam
are coming up with these. Well, Islam's derivative of, I would say, the Bible and Christianity and Judaism, but
right.
But these other cultures are independently apparently coming up with the same thing. So he's kind of undermining his argument. If he's saying, well, the only way the Bible could have gotten this notion of an underworld or Sheol or hell is by copying Sumer or these earlier cultures.
Well, hold on. So just to clarify on that, AJ's not making that argument. That's going to be brought up by Professor Dave later on. And so I'm sorry if I didn't explain that. This isn't necessarily like AJ saying that they've copied from it, as Professor Dave will say that later, specifically in another clip that we'll watch. But two different guys, yeah.
So what is his point then, mostly about this, the fact that there are other cultures that have this notion?
So in the context of the entire video, and Josh, I'll let you jump on after this. So he's more talking about like the hollow earth theory, and where like these stories might have derived from. There's this big concept, for those who don't know, about the hollow earth and that there are people in ancient civilizations. He mentioned Agartha specifically in that video, in that little clip that we just watched. And so that's the overall context of what AJ's trying to hint at here, is basically that all of these religions have stories about people coming or being put in an underworld type scenario. And later on then with the hell comment, which is what I'm going to comment on here in a little bit, that might have been a later evolution of some of these older concepts like Sheol, like Hades, and then whatever else, Ker, I think he mentioned as the ancient Sumerian. So that was more of a later derivative of, and I believe that idea is patently false.
Close enough.
None of us are yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. So anyway, Dale, does that answer your question?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
All right. David, any comments before I jump into this?
I mean, whenever we comment on these, there's just one thing that we have to reiterate over and over again is, where's the evidence? What's your primary source? And that's not ever covered, because I can tell you that going back and studying these ancient religions, you're not going to get a didactic teaching on any of those. Right. So how can you can't assume what they meant by some of these underworld claims, right? Yeah, there's people that go to these different places. Yeah, because we have a common concept of an afterlife. I mean, even the Jews didn't have a full concept of it. Some of them didn't believe in an afterlife. They just met, you go into the ground until, you go to sleep, basically, some sects did believe that, but you see other sects did not. And that's clearly evidenced in their tombs with the soul window, after 4 days, it would pass through the window and go to be with God, because it didn't recognize its body anymore, kind of even Lazarus' tomb, had one, so like, I mean, it's just really funny how people want to make the correlation the causation as well, and that it's an assumption fallacy that is committed over and over and over again. And I don't know what the obsession is with copying. Like, why do you assume that one culture copies from the other? You know, what if there's just a common belief because there's an objective truth that once we pass, we're with our creator. Because the creator is so evident that all cultures have this idea of going to be with their creator. So it always blows my mind that we have this assumption ingrained in us that we want to say, oh, well, these guys believe that and they're earlier. It doesn't matter if they're earlier. It doesn't make it any more true. But every human civilization, as far as you can go back, had an idea that there was life after this. It continued in some way, shape, or form. And yes, I think that's more common than the ones that thought they were just going into the ground.
Right. No, I agree. And we see that spread through Egyptian cultures. The first thing that comes to my mind, right? The burial. I mean, this is kind of what we see with this common idea of a burial is the hope of a resurrection with
or an
that.
afterlife.
Like the two are linked, right? Or an afterlife, right. Yeah. So with that being said, no, I agree 100%.
I do find it very odd though, back in the 60s when this Hollow Earth stuff started getting really, really popular again, it came in different forms, right? So you had the aliens under the sea, that was the big one, the Bermuda Triangle, the aliens live there. And a lot of this is there's an intelligent life. And this is what they try to extract from these, that there's some sort of higher civilization that our spirits can go to, but our physical bodies can't. And that just it strikes that whole idea that Hugh Ross was talking about when they were talking about these UFOs and stuff, transdimensional things. And this whole idea of a transdimensional reality, I think, is very, very interesting, to say the least.
It's compelling to think that the universe has more to it than you can see, and then being human, we naturally fill the gap. But I think the thing that also is kind of underlying some of the things he said in that clip, that he's not saying out loud, but kind of implying, is that it seems like he's saying not only is the notion of hell in the Christian sense a new development, historically speaking, which is what it sounds like he was trying to indicate, is that hell is an idea that developed long after these other ancient world religions. But the other thing that he seemed to try to indicate without actually saying it was that hell as a judgment and the judgment of the gods or something of that sort was unique to Christianity and also a later development. It seemed like he was trying to lump those two things together and say, yeah, this was an afterthought, really. And you used it as a control device by making people afraid. Right.
That's what I got.
Which isn't the truth at all, because death was so prevalent. Some of these people begged for an afterlife by going through the things they went to. Some of the plagues where, their insides turn to mush, and they see this stuff and every day, and they see death every day. Not odd to we see roadkill on the road and we're like, oh man, that deer got nailed. But back in those days, you could walk down the street and see a person easily huddled up in a corner dead. It wasn't it wasn't uncommon for family members to die in your house. It wasn't uncommon for babies to die in your house and children. Things that we look at with horror, but yeah, I hear you. And then lumping that into, well, it's a control device. No, hell was never a control device. It's there, it's something that we have to talk about, because eternal separation from God isn't something to joke around with,
Right.
It's part of the system that was created. Let's just call it what it is. Like, hell is part of the system that was created by God. And to say that it's like a later invention, well, by who? The Roman Catholic Church? Because they didn't exist in 1 AD. They didn't write the Book of Enoch. They didn't write the Testament of Abraham. They didn't write 4 Ezra, foreshadowing all these texts that I'm getting ready to get into. But they didn't write these things. The Roman Catholic Church, quote unquote, came in 1054. So this is 1,000 years after the fact. Now, is there one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church? Yes, but we were united then, before 1054. And so just the historical element that, like, I just want to ask AJ, invented by who? Because Jesus talked about this. People before Jesus talked about this. The Old Testament talks about this concept of eternal punishment. That's what I'm taking hell to be in this context, is the concept of eternal punishment. But Dale, jump on real quick, and then I want to get into these texts.
Yeah. Okay. So just a couple things I wanted to say. So the first thing, just kind of responding to David's point that hell is not a system of control. I actually kind of disagree with that a little bit, because I do think that hell proper, the end state, is a basically akin to a quarantine zone. And the quarantine zone is to control the spread of the sin disease. So, I talk about what's the justification for punishments, and I always take a consequentialist understanding. Well, one of the beneficial consequences of punishment will be to quarantine dangerous people from others. And if people are unrepentant and they're not going to meet the conditions for salvation, in other words, they want to retain that, they don't want to be cleansed or purged of their sin disease. Well, as we know, sin breeds only more sin, and that's why God has to control the spread of that disease by quarantining.
Yeah, that's not what I meant, Dale, at all. And I hear what you're saying, but we're talking. What I got from AJ was that it's a control device to herd the people and keep them in order, right? That's what people think hell was used as, and that's where these atheists get off. Yeah, a fear tactic, basically. That and it controls the masses, because you got to scare them with something worse than what they can think of, and you got to keep them in line that way. And that's just not the case, especially for a religion that was persecuted in its first 300 years.
Gotcha. Yeah. That said, I will agree with this skeptic that, look, hell is scary. It's supposed to be scary. We're being warned about it. So there is nothing wrong with warning people about what's true, kind of thing, to help them avoid that and stuff like that. So that's the only thing I would add. Even if the skeptic is correct, there's nothing wrong with scaring people about what's actually real and scary.
Yeah.
We're supposed to fear hell, or we're supposed to fear death, and stuff like that. So that's the only other thing I'll add. But otherwise, I do agree with David. It's not just, it's a made up thing just for politicians to control people, and there's no hell, I'm just gonna use scare tactics to go after these gullible people. I agree, David's correct. That's wrong. And the other aspect of beyond just being afraid of hell is, look, we're motivated by the positive of earning salvation, of being in that end state with God. It's a positive reason why we follow Jesus. It's not just, I don't want to go to hell. It's more, no, I want to go to heaven. I want to be in God's presence. So that's the other aspect the skeptic's totally missing. Okay, the second thing I just wanted to say was just kind of a quick question. If we don't have time, we can skip it, but I just wanted to get your guys' take, because this skeptic is going into older times, right? And I know we do have references to something like eternal punishment in like Daniel 12 and stuff like this. But some skeptics will say, yeah, but if you go back even further, like beyond the Babylonian Empire and stuff like that, things like in Ecclesiastes, they don't teach there is an afterlife. They say, no, you die and you're worm food and that's it. So I just wanted to get from you guys, is there a development in the Bible as to whether there is an afterlife or not? And if there is an afterlife, what that afterlife entails? What do you guys think of someone like Bart Ehrman making that claim?
I think intuitively. Go ahead, David. Go ahead.
No,
I saw them both jump on this, so I was like, I'll hang
go,
out.
Josh, you go first.
Okay, I was going to say, I think intuitively you would have to, in the biblical narrative, even if all you had was the Bible, understand the revelation about afterlife to be something that's in development, because Adam and Eve didn't know about an afterlife because death hadn't been introduced to them. Nothing about afterlife would have made any sense to them, because after what? Life is forever. I intend to be with the Lord forever. and in this intention of eternality that's kind of imprinted, like our hearts are haunted with understanding that eternality is something we should have or want, and yet people go about seeking it in evil ways, but the way that we can understand the situation is I think God continually reveals things over time, and that's a feature of reality rather than a bug. It's not a bug, it's a feature that God reveals things over time. You know what I mean? Like I find it strange. It would be like asking my newborn what they want to do when they grow up. They have no conception for this yet. It's only once they've experienced enough to have a framework for it, they have a holding place in their mind for something like that, and then you mentioned it to them, they can start to develop imagery and understanding surrounding this thing that's future yet for them, that they don't understand. You know what I mean? Like, naturally we would have to learn. It'd have to be a progression. I don't see any other way.
Yeah, I agree with you, Josh. I think that is 100%. But where I would come in maybe a little bit different, and I'm sure, Josh, you probably agree with this too, is that it's spoken all throughout that there's an afterlife. As soon as there's a difference between a spirit and a body, there's an idea of where does that spirit go once the physical body is gone, right? And you see that all throughout the scripture. Into your hands I commend my spirit. You see all these different concepts of an afterlife very present, and you see a difference between the body and the spirit. So when they're like, you're going to the grave, yeah, that aspect of you is going to the grave, but the spirit is going somewhere else, and that's going to be with the one that made the spirit and breathed it into you, right? So those ideas are still prevalent all throughout, but like Josh said, it's something that's not direct, because there is a progression and a discovery of things. And I think discovering those things, I think a height of education and learning, and grows us as a people and as a civilization, whether it's moral progression or even just the mundane type things that end up making us go to the moon, technology, all these different things that we discover as we progress as a species, just like a child growing up, same deal, but on a very cosmic scale.
So to answer, Dill, your question very quickly, I would agree with both of these guys in some sense. So I think that given Abraham, who came out of Ur, right? This is where the scriptures say that Abraham literally comes out of. So he's in the midst of this, Mesopotamian mythology, I guess you could call it. He has the concept of an afterlife, in the sense that he's got the concept of the resurrection, right? This is why Hebrews tells us that he sacrifices, or is willing to sacrifice, I should say, his son, is because he knew that he would be raised from the dead, right? Now, does that mean that in that moment he would be raised from the dead, or does that have a second connotation or a dual prophetic fulfillment of an ultimate resurrection? I think the concept's both, just personally, but it's definitely the former as well, because the promise was given to Abraham that Isaac would be the father of many nations. Abraham is the father of many nations through Isaac, through Jacob, and so on and so forth. And this is how we come up with the Hebrew dynasty, or the Hebrew kingdom, that was led by Saul, David, and Solomon until the split. And so, to go back to as far as Abraham, do we get any direct evidence of an afterlife? I think so. I think in the scriptures, whenever the gospel was given to Adam, to Noah, to all of these people, that they understood what it was, right, to preserve life, because, like Josh said, death was never the intention, right? Sin crept in the world. This is where death comes. So the idea from the get-go was to spend forever with God, and to live in his midst forever. And so I think that concept, even after sin was introduced, was carried down through the generations, and that's why these other cultures that came from Noah, right, developed things like, Ker or Sheol or Hades or whatever, however they want to call it. It's for all intents and purposes the same thing, right? It's just different aspects, and I think different tellings, right, with different languages and different cultures of that original story. So with that being said, I do want to get into some of these texts and then go on to the next clip, because guys, if we spend 40 minutes on a clip, we're not going to get done. So let's I love what you guys are saying. But I do want to get into some of these texts, and so I'm not going to read all of them, but I'll list and then read a couple of them. I'll list all of them for those who are interested, and they can go look this up. But the very first thing we've got, obviously off the top, is the Old Testament, and that's going to be the book of Daniel. In Daniel 12:2, Daniel writes, "Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, and others to shame and everlasting contempt." This is just straight up from Daniel, who, according to, now I get it, like whenever, Professor Dave or Bart Ehrman or whoever, they're going to say, yeah, Daniel was written super late. This was after the fact. I think there's arguments on both sides. I actually take that Daniel actually wrote Daniel, and this has been preserved. But the idea that there is the resurrection, and we're not going to spend our time. So I guess I should have said that in coming into this, for those who haven't watched this channel, for those who don't know really where we're coming from. Obviously, Faith Unaltered is a Christian podcasting network, and so we are taking the Bible. We're presuming the Bible's validity, the authority of the scriptures. So we're not going to spend our time arguing for that. You can go back and watch other episodes where I know Dale, David, and I have made those arguments, why we believe the Bible is the inspired word of God. So with that being said, so we're taking the scriptures at face value here and assuming their authority and validity. And so Daniel 12:2, again, multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to everlasting shame and contempt. Clearly what Jesus was talking about in the New Testament about the great resurrection of the dead. Both groups will be raised, so both wicked and righteous. Some will inherit eternal life, some will inherit eternal damnation, or I don't know if I'd call that an inheritance or not, but it is what it is. The other one that's older, that's older than Christianity, maybe not older than the book of Daniel, but older than Christianity for sure, and we know this because of the Dead Sea Scrolls, is the book of Enoch. And so this is, now I know what people will say is that, well, the book of Enoch was broken up into sections. It was written over time. Like, we didn't have all, I think it's 109 or 108 chapters. And so I actually agree with that. I think that Enoch is a compilation that was handed down over time. That's why I'm sticking with the first 36 chapters in this, because all scholars, to my knowledge, will agree that the first 36 chapters are the oldest that we have. Now, whether they go back to Enoch or not, that's debated. I think Jude believes that they did, because he specifically says that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied this, and then quotes the book of Enoch directly. So I think that's an interesting conversation. But just for everybody's agreement here, what we will say is this goes the book of Enoch does stem before Christianity, and that's according to the Dead Sea Scroll find. So the book of Enoch in chapter 10, verses 13 and 14 says this, quote, "And to Michael also the Lord said, Go and announce his crime to Samyaza and to others who are with him, who have been associated with women, that they might be polluted with all their impurity. And when all their sons shall be slain, when they shall see the perdition of their beloved, bind them for 70 generations underneath the earth, even to the day of judgment and of consummation, until the judgment, the effect of which will last forever and be completed." Again, 1 Enoch 22, this is 12 through 14. Quote, "And this place is the end of heaven and earth. This has become a prison for the stars and the host of heaven, and the stars which roll over the fire are they which have transgressed the commandment of the Lord in the beginning of their rising, because they did not come forth at their appointed times." This is what Jude alludes to.
What was that verse?
This is 1 Enoch 22, 12 through 14. But it goes on. He says, "And he was wroth with them, and bound them till the time when their guilt should be consummated, even for 10,000 years. And as we know, 10,000 is just a metaphorical way of saying forever. I don't think it's a literal 10,000 years. But the last one that I'll quote, and then I'll list the rest, is 2nd Esdras. So this is actually called 4 Ezra in the pseudepigraphical literature. 2nd Esdras 7, or 4 Ezra for confusion's sake. So 4 Ezra chapter 7 verses 78 through 79 says, quote, "The righteous will receive their reward, and the souls of the wicked their punishment. For there are those who have lived wickedly and do not repent, who will therefore be tormented forever." End quote. And so the last two I have, the Testament of Abraham, chapter 11. This is in the longer recension that, according to some scholars, I don't know the exact date on this, but it is the origin of this goes back to Egypt. And then the Apocalypse of Abraham and the Apocalypse of Baruch are all Jewish. And I guess the common theme I wanted to get at here was that these are all Old Testament, apocryphal, pseudepigraphical texts that have their origin within Judaism that we know stems to Moses. For a fact, I would argue earlier, Abraham, that was the first of the Hebrews, so to say. But these are just, a few texts that, and there are many more that talk about this concept. And again, just for clarity's sake, I'm taking AJ because he brought up the fear factor. I'm taking hell to be this concept of eternal punishment. Now, if he wants to argue that it's something like Dante invented, I think there are pseudepigraphical texts like First Enoch that kind of describe things in the way that Dante, but I'll give that to him. I'll say that, yeah, Dante invented this in what was it, the 13th, 14th century, something like that. Okay, fine. But the concept of eternal punishment is old, and it stems back even before the time of Christianity, which we all know is how old? Guys, 2,000 years. So I don't think that's a relatively recent new invention or adaptation or evolution of these other religions. But anybody else want to make some closing comments on that before we go to the Joe Rogan and Terry Howard interview?
I think we're good.
Good to go?
I'll just add very quickly.
I know you would. Yep.
Should I stop doing that? I don't know.
No, I'm playing with you. Go ahead.
So
I would fix the feedback in your mic. I don't know what's going on, but we are getting some feedback from your mic.
Like an echo or something?
No, it's like clicking and buzzing.
It sounds like you're frying something in the background.
Are you frying up some bacon, bro?
No, I'm not.
Canadian bacon.
Yeah, exactly. Canadian bacon. Yeah, but my thing to say.
Yeah.
Oh, so Tyler's looking at documents written around the 2nd century BC and stuff like that, before Jesus' time and stuff. If we're looking at that period, just between 200 BC to 200 AD, N.T. Wright has done, in his book Resurrection of the Son of God, has studied every single Jewish and or Christian and or even pagan text at that time, and every single one of them speaks of an afterlife and that sort of thing. So it's just uncontroversial. There are no sources, especially of a Jewish or Christian type, that don't talk about the afterlife and or the bodily resurrection of the dead. So if that's the time period we're looking at, this atheist has failed. Yeah.
Right on. I appreciate. See, the only reason I didn't give a specific. I mean, you're right. Those are the texts I'm looking at before Christianity, but because he said just relatively recent new, I don't know what time frame he has in mind per se. Like I said, I would assume it's Dante, but I don't know that for a fact. So if AJ somehow sees this and wants to clarify that, then by all means, tag Y-Files in this video, and maybe he'll get to it. I don't know. He's probably super busy, though, and we're a super small channel. So help us out with that. Subscribe to the channel. Thanks. All right, next on the list, and thank you for that, Del. I appreciate it. Next on the list is the very famous or infamous, however you want to look at that, Joe Rogan and Terrance Howard. And I'm not going to give any really intro to this. A lot of people have seen it. But Terrance Howard made some very interesting claims, scientifically debunked claims, throughout this entire interview that other people have talked about, but I haven't seen anybody talk about his religious claims that he brings up here. So we're going to look at two clips very, very quickly. The first one is at the 1 hour and 31 minute mark. And so what I'll do, I'll play that. I'll let you guys comment on it. I've only got very few things to say about this, so this will go relatively quick. And then the other one's at the 2 hour and 39 minute mark. And so while you guys are discussing the first one, I'll go ahead and find that next clip, and then I'll jump in. So whoever wants to jump in after this, feel free. And no, Terrance Howard is not doing an impersonation of Jesus on the cross here. I just happened to stop it here this time. So
this ether and that waveform that's the consciousness. We are all just one great being.
Yeah.
You know, that's what they forget. We're not separate. The universe is probably one cell inside of some super organism.
Right.
And we're just little who, little who's like Horton hears a who and trying to make sense of it. And it's a beautiful thing that we're making sense of it. But everything is just one great being. We're all God. That's what Jesus was talking about. That's what Buddha was talking about. It's recognizing the divinity in you. What I did as a child, I said, I'm going to, instead of waiting for the Messiah to show up, what if everybody picked up their torture stake and behaved and did the things that they had expected the Messiah to do?
All right. There's the clip, and you guys jump in it if you want to. I'll just say this real quick. I like the idea that he's talking about microcosms and macrocosms. I think that's a very interesting subject. I think that's something that we're all familiar with here. I just think he goes to an extreme that if you're going to quote Jesus and Buddha, like, definitely do your research first, because that's not what, to my knowledge, I know Jesus didn't say anything like that. And I'm not sure if Buddha, so I won't comment on that, but I don't think so. But anyway, y'all, Josh, if you want to jump in on this, and yes, GU, I don't know, maybe not, but that's interesting. All right.
Oh man. He's an interesting fellow. I'll give him that. But most of what he just said was, I think, more so attached to a dream than it is to anything that he I'm not sure that he has a better framework to hang the thing on, but it sounds like what he's trying to talk about is the idea that everybody is a shared common consciousness that's just broken into tiny pieces inhabiting matter right now, right? And then he said after that the entire universe is probably just one cell for some sort of superordinate mega being, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I think you have a good idea, but you're not really considering the idea. You're kind of jumping to a fantasy extreme, which is, I mean, it's enchanting and that's cool. It's better than materialism. I'll give him that. But it's a very weird concoction is what I would say. It's a very, very strange concoction. But I think the closest to what he said to be useful in that little miniature rant was, if you don't see the Messiah in front of you, you and everyone around you should be doing what you can to model him in his stead. I think that is wisdom. I think the reason why he's saying it might not be wisdom, and the way he staged it might be something prideful. If I don't see Messiah, I'll make myself one. I'm not saying that, but I am saying there's wisdom in calling forth everyone around us to take up the gauntlet to be Christ in the earth. And I think that could be derived from what he said just as easily as anything prideful. But as far as the universe is a cell in a mega organism, or, we're all a shared consciousness broken into tiny little fragments, I don't see any reason to agree with that just based on the clip. But it's a very interesting idea and would make one heck of a movie.
I'd just say back that claim up. You know, where do people get these kind of ideas? You know, and then trying to, Buddhism, depending on what Buddhism taught, you have the Mayan Buddhism who do believe in like souls and stuff. I think, I don't even know if I said that right. But the original forms of Buddhism are very atheistic, almost in a way. You know, I debated as Zen Buddhist for a number of years, and it's just the oddest thing. Basically, it comes down to you need the self to tell the self that there is no self. It's just wild, man. It's like, okay, that's pretty much what you're saying to me, is that there is no self, but I need the self to tell me that there's no self. So that's just contradictory to me right there, then and there. It doesn't pass muster in the realm of reality when you put those type of claims to the test. It's not a both and, right? A lot of these new agers believe in these ideas of a both and as well, and you get that with these newer religions and these newer concepts, but I don't have any good reason to think that any of that's true, right? I do have a good reason to see the resurrection and that's true, right? With the not only the historical facts around it, but all the testimony from the eyewitnesses and so forth, and what came after, right? Jesus never taught, like I think Tyler was saying, Jesus never taught any of that stuff, He never taught anything. So if you're going to say that someone taught this, I wonder where you're getting it from. Where are you getting this idea from?
The only thing close that I've heard different groups now, so New Agers and Mormons are the ones that come to mind. Whenever Jesus says in John 10:34, is it not written that ye are gods, or have I not said that ye are gods? Right.
Right.
And let me just,
from the Psalm.
Yeah. Right. Psalm 82.
But again, this comes down with never just read a Bible verse, right? We always say this, because there's context. Context determines meaning, period. And if you don't read it in context and you don't read it the way it's supposed to be read, because there is a way it's supposed to be read, because it's referring to something else, right. A psalm that goes back to the Old Testament, you're going to miss the point. And you come up with all sorts of concoctions at that point.
It's super easy to refute, because all you have to do is look at, like, and I don't know if this is where Terrance Howard, I'm just saying, like, this is where I've heard people talk about the concept of, like, Christ consciousness and that, we're all one being, which I get that, like, if you say that that's the church, right? Like, believers who are united to Christ, like, yes, those are one organism. I think the microcosm that Terrance is, advocating for, I don't think his microcosm that he's advocating for is accurate right. at all. But I think the concept of microcosm and macrocosm is, right? But just to comment on this real quick, I just want to read a quick paragraph from Father Lawrence Farley on John 10:34. And this is where I think most commentators go. Now, I know Michael Heiser, of blessed memory, he's reposed now, for those who don't know, but Michael Heiser has a different view. I think somebody in the comments can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think everyone else basically agrees with what I'm about to read here. And if you guys don't, let me know. But it says this, and this is from the Gospel of John, beholding the glory, from Father Lawrence Farley. He says this. He says, quote, that is, so John 10:34, as judges, some were called to share God's authority and to have the power over life and death, acquitting some so that they lived and condemning others to death. If these were called gods, even though they were mere men, those to whom the divine word of God came, and if these could share God's authority, how much more could Jesus, whom the Father sanctified and sent into the world, claim to be the Son of God and to share the divine authority? The Scripture is not able to be destroyed and thus can only speak eternal truth as they freely acknowledge. This very Scripture designates mere men to be gods, aka judges, and they have no problem with that. So how can they blame Jesus and say that he blasphemes because he claims to be the Son of God? Their objection assumes that men cannot share God's authority in any way, yet Jesus shows that even on a human level, this is not so. How much more can he, as the pre-existent Son, charged by the Father to do his will, share his authority? And this is what we know, that the Jews wanted Jesus to be crucified. The Romans did crucify him for this. Like, this is why Jesus, as a Jew, this is why this was such a big deal. Not that what Terrance is saying, hey guys, y'all are gods, we're all just one big, happy, organized Godhead. No, Jesus was a monotheistic Jew who believed in only one God that, and we'll get into this here in a little bit, but that separates Judaism from literally every other religion in that time. Everybody else, to my knowledge, was polytheistic, believed in a pantheon of gods, this, that, and the other. And in the very first of the 10 Commandments, this is what separates the Hebrews from literally everyone else. Thou shalt not have any other gods before thee, right? And so Jesus is claiming to be the hypostasis of this one God. Not that we are all have Christ consciousness, not that we are all this one cell that can be called God, and that's the universe and everything within it, right? No, that there's this disconnect between God and everything that he's created, and Jesus is claiming, look, that God that you all understand, that's me. Dale? Or sorry, if I cut anyone off and want to comment on that, but yeah, Dale.
Yeah, I've got 3 main points to say, right? So kind of along the lines of Josh, like, yeah, cool story, bro, but it's just a story.
That's the first time I've ever heard you say that. Hashtag Dale said it. Cool
Dale
story, bro.
Yeah, I am not pleased, but no, it's like the problem with this guy is he's making up Eastern religions. He's kind of like Barbara With, right? Like she's just Buddhism. And
that's who he reminded me of. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's exactly who he reminded me of, the psychic Barbara With.
Exactly. And all New Agers, they do this. They've got this affection for privileging Eastern religions. But if you want to know who Jesus actually is, you've got to go to the best historical source that every scholar in the world admits, even non-Christian ones. That's the pages of the New Testament and the Gospels. And
that's right.
Look, the first point here about this thing being an organism, I wouldn't interpret the body of Christ literally as an organism, but that's kind of a minor disagreement. I get what Tyler was saying there, but this doesn't make any sense to me. Like, we're a cell, we're a part of God, in other words, is what this guy's trying to say under pantheism. How does that make sense? How am I God and someone who's divided from me, separate, David Russell or Josh, they're also God? No, we don't have the individual divine essence. God is God. I'm Dale. I'm a human being, kind of thing. So that's one thing that I never get with these Eastern religions is how does an individual essence or consciousness divide itself? That's impossible. You can't. Individual essences are indivisible by essence. They can't be divided. But all of these Eastern religions come up with this incoherent idea that for some reason we're divided and undivided. It doesn't make any sense to me. So it's because
we're God and we can be paradoxical, Dale.
Dale, can I follow up with that before you get to your second point? Just to add on, we see this trend over and over again, and you guys, we always talk about this. Is it's really taken away from the unique way God made us, right? It's really corrupting the image of God and what we are actually supposed to be, trying to make us believe that we're something we're not, right? And that has been repetitious throughout history. This is like one of the ploys of the enemy, is to take away our individual uniqueness, but in this case, making our person higher than what it is. Oh, you'll be like God, or you'll be gods, and it is really a distortion of what we are, and it actually takes away from our uniqueness, because we're all individuals created in the image of God, yet we're all individuals.
Did you just bark?
Huh? No.
Did you hear that?
I heard that.
I did.
Like,
It
sounded like somebody went, and turn your volume down, y'all. Hold on, I will. It sounded like,
wow. Nope.
Yeah, that was weird. I heard that
Sorry.
too.
Technology.
Anyway.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I totally agree. I agree with you, David, fully on that. For a minute, I thought you were going into my third point there, but my second point here is obviously, again, look, Buddhism. I believe Buddhism proper, the teachings of Buddha, are reflected in the original Theravada Buddhism, which was atheistic. That is totally contradictory to the divine scriptures and to what Jesus taught, just historically. Even if you're not a Christian and you think the Bible's just a garbage book, just a random historical book that's unreliable, even still, historians will still say Jesus believed in God. So that's just a straightforward contradiction right there. The third and final point that I think is really important with this Buddhism aspect is there's a fundamental difference between Jesus and Christianity and Buddhism. Christianity and Jesus were world affirming, right? The world is created by God. It's good. It's been corrupted by sin, and that needs to be purged. But our bodies, the creation, the universe, these are good things in and of themselves. They've been designed by God for us when functioning properly, and it's a good thing. Buddhism is world denying as a religion. Deny yourself. You have to, the four noble truths, as it's called, right? This is the core of Buddhism proper. To live is to suffer. That contradicts Christianity. No, to live is good. We only suffer because of the fall, but that isn't inherent to life. Life is good, right? So this doctrine of dukkha, to live is to suffer, is totally contradictory.
Is that like Dookie?
Yes. And then suffering is caused.
I thought you just said it with a Canadian accent. Sorry.
No worries. And then suffering is caused by desire. This is the doctrine of tanha, or attachment, right? No, desires again are good. We are created to have certain desires, but in order to in Buddhism, you have to eliminate. How do you eliminate suffering? By eliminating all your attachments, even your attachments to your own individual essence and stuff like that. And by following the Eightfold Path, you eliminate everything, including yourself. The ultimate goal is this nirvana, which is kind of a
they were a good band.
Sorry?
They were a good band.
Yeah. But nirvana, it literally means a quenching or a blowing out of your own soul. You cease to exist. Anything that tells me to deny that beautiful I that God created, no, get out of my face. You're a false religion. You're satanic. No, I love my essence, my soul that God created, and I will never give up life. It's good, whether spiritual life or my physical life, as long as I can, kind of thing. But physical life in the sense of the resurrection. Look, we are going to become resurrected as well. So life, both physical and spiritual, is good. We need to be world affirming, not world denying like the Buddhists. And Jesus and Buddha, contradictory on that front.
Did you have a third point?
I agree with that. I think that the contradiction is obviously when you point it out like that, but in an ironic sense also, Christianity makes all of the intuitions that are inherent in
Oh, you froze.
In some sense, when you get some of the teachings of Christ that almost appropriate the idea of confronting the world as though suffering were a feature and not a bug, right? And taking up your cross to follow him, which is willfully confronting a life of suffering, and acknowledging beforehand that that's pretty much what it is, but doing that because life is good. So to the end that you just described, rather than to the end that Buddhism would describe. That's where the contradiction, I think, really lives, is in the intent or intended state. The divine intended state is not to be melted down into a sea of endless consciousness. It's in fact to be united with the source of all consciousness and remain both yourself and of him. And that relationship being something where you both exist for. You know what I mean? Like that's, and like you said, to exist good. To be a spiritual being is good. To be a physical being is good. To be the combination of those two things is good, right? And so to affirm those things is kind of to say that it's important to know that the highest intended state of a human is not to be consumed by a spirit. You know what I mean? So like I'm right there with you. I just wanted to kind of nuance that the suffering is something that is to be expected because of the end you just described.
That's good.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Like I think Buddha's his mistake is he's thinking suffering is an inherent part of life. It's a feature, as opposed to where the Christians, we know it's only a part of life because it's a bug. It's a contingent or accidental property of the world. That's not life. That's death, actually, from a biblical standpoint, right? Sin is death and stuff like that. So yeah, those were my 3 points about the indivisibility of the individual essence, the contradiction of atheism versus theism between Buddha and Jesus, and then this world affirming. And by world, I don't mean like the sinful world. I mean the world as it's created and designed by God versus world denying. Those are my 3 points. I hope they're interesting.
Good. Yeah, good job. All right, guys, let's jump on to this next little tidbit from our good friend Terrance Howard again. Again, this is from if you're just joining us, thank you for hanging out. We've already critiqued AJ Gentile from the Y-Files and his concept of hell being a later invention. We're now on the Joe Rogan and Terrance Howard interview. And then here in just a minute, we're going to be getting to some things Professor Dave said about Hebrew mythology stealing from Sumerian and ancient Mesopotamian mythology. So this is our next clip.
Aggressive in their root growth.
Wow, they're cooperative.
So just a background real quick. So he's talking about how everything is alive right now. So trees, the pavement, rocks, everything in the universe is alive. And he's going to get really, really sentimental here in just a second. I thought he was getting ready to start crying, but he's going to say something and y'all will catch it, but I'll just let him speak for himself. But just to give a context, that's kind of what's happening right here. He's mad that, and which I think he has a right to be, that there's death in the world. And this just shows that I think people who are atheists, and you'll hear Joe Rogan agree with him. I don't know if Joe's atheist or agnostic or whatever. I know he said some pretty hardcore things about Christianity, but with that being said, it shows, I think, this inherent intuitive thing that we all share as humans, right? Because we're made in the image of God, we have this inherent just disgust of death, right? And so I agree with Terry on this, but that's about all I agree with because of what he's getting ready to say.
Well, yes, when they're in the family, the tree, they'll take radioactive carbon or nitrogen and put it on the leaf of a mother tree, of a fern or of some kind or fir tree, and they will put isotope or radioactive identifier at its offspring, and you'll see that mother tree is, through the mycelia, is taking that nitrogen and giving it to its youngsters.
Yes. Yeah.
They call out and they speak and they're interactive and
they share resources.
They're alive and sentient because everything is alive. But we see everything as dead because of what the Bible said. Because it breathed into life, and the universe is just one big nothingness of dead. There's nothing dead in the universe. Everything is alive and everything is a piece of God. So when we do good things, then God is good. When we do bad things, God works in mysterious ways. It's just Just how we are behaving. And we can all take the conscious level and recognize, okay, somebody's got to do the right thing. And if you do the right thing, the right things happen.
So, a lot here. Karma. Got Josh, go ahead.
Somebody send this guy Saint Maximus Cosmic Mystery of Jesus Christ, please, and let him read about the Logi and the Logos, because what he's saying, it's like he's trying to have good dreams. I can see it in his eyes. He's trying to have good dreams. He just has no clue where they're going.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, man, everything he was saying just now is like, it's a person, bro. God is a person. It, like, as soon as that drops in your mind, all of this is all the weird is going to melt away, and it's going to be filled with glory, because he's all like, just the weirdest. Like, I can see the shadow of something that's supposed to be there, but it's like he's got the wrong face on it. You know what I mean? And so it's like, as soon as he has the revelation that God is a person and not an idea and not a composite, not an organism, right? Like, God is a person, and that's why you have personhood. Once that comes in, I feel like the Gospels are gonna like grab this guy by the collar.
It's all there, like the makings of, you know, what we have, like all of our building blocks, everything that we all four would share, right? It's there with this guy, which is why I really wanted to comment whenever I listened to it. You know, I was like, man, he's so close and yet so far away, right? But the thing that I really wanted to hit on this was the concept that the Bible teaches death, right? No, it doesn't. This is, so everything, we've really kind of already commented on this, but just to reiterate really what we've all said, is that no, the Bible teaches that death is a bug, that death, because of sin, came into the world. It was never the intention, right? Like, this is not why God created, to bring death in, right? That's not the case. Death is just exactly what the Bible describes it as, is a curse, right? The wages of sin is what? Is death, right? And so, if anything, the Bible teaches, and Jesus taught, and this is the ideas of Judaism flowing down into Christianity, right? Because they're not two separate religions, which I know most people kind of think they are on the pop level anyway, but they're really not. This is the idea that no, we should take care of each other. We should take care of our environment. This is why Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden. Why? Because they did not exercise dominion properly. They took it for themselves. They became greedy with it. And God said, nuh-uh, not in my game. And go on, right? And so if anything, the Bible, Terrance Howard is just flat wrong here. The Bible teaches us that life is everything and that death is the curse. So anyway, that's really all I wanted to say about that. But guys, go ahead. David, I saw you unmute.
Yeah, you know, I mean, you kind of stole the words out of my mouth. I mean, the accusations. Mm-hmm. All I can say is this, because I can get, that righteous indignation. I can go after it apologetically, right? And we can, dismantle it like we do with everything else. However, what I want to say is this guy's ignorant. He doesn't know what the Bible says. He's familiar maybe with cultural Christianity, yep. And the decadence that we have kind of pushed it to in this country. But he doesn't know what Christianity is, like the reality of it. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't understand where it came from, where what its roots actually are. And it's a shame. It's a real shame. He's a product of the culture. And when you're a product of the culture like this, and arrogance or ignorance reigns supreme, and scriptural literacy is at an all-time high, this is what you get. And that's it. I say that with love, man.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I couldn't say it any better myself. Thank you. Dale.
Yeah, I agree with your guys' points. I guess something different that you mentioned, this guy goes through the panpsychist view. Everything has consciousness and stuff like that. This is just total nonsense, and philosophers of consciousness have refuted this position. So, like, one just very basic argument against this view that should be obvious to everyone in a properly basic way is the fact that rocks, inanimate objects like rocks or a chair or something like that, they lack certain intrinsic or phenomenal properties that only consciousness or beings with consciousness have. So it lacks, for example, intentionality or qualia, right? There's no evidence that a rock has any internal intentionality, right? The rock itself isn't of something else or about something else, right? It has no states that are of something. Like I have a thought of a chair or of an ice cream or something like that. The rocks, there's no evidence of any consciousness there, and there's no evidence that it has any of the internal properties which are distinctive and unique and define what it means to be conscious. So just right there, that's kind of like an obvious contradiction. Our observations prove that there's a fundamental distinction between certain beings that actually have consciousness to varying levels, and animals have consciousness as well to a lesser level than we do. Rocks and things don't, and that's why we call rocks it, whereas animals are he or she, or human beings are he or she, right? So yeah, that's kind of that's one argument that philosophers give that's just refutes the panpsychist view, and I think the vast majority of people can immediately see that, and it resonates that there's a difference. I'm sorry, that rocks are not conscious.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out, Dale. You know what I mean? Like, I am kind of being lighthearted here, but you're right. Like, rocks, there is something, and this is interesting. So we could even delve into like different degrees of this, but there is something that we as human beings have that I would even argue that animals have to some extent, right? That just pavement and rocks and other different things like that don't have. Maybe it's different whenever it comes to plants specifically, right? Because there is this idea like that they are alive, but I don't think they have the spirit of God energizing them. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
I would agree. Just because scientists claim that plants are biologically alive, that doesn't mean they are alive in the sense that they have a soul or a spirit. So yeah, I would argue even ants. I don't think ants are biblically alive either.
Yeah, right. There's something different. Yeah, who says rocks are firm in their beliefs and being solid, of being solid and upstanding. Yeah, I agree. Well but no, you're right.
Genius a rockhead, you know.
Yeah.
That was the best insult I could call. I don't know.
That's right.
That's all right. I'm a metalhead.
This is interesting. GU says plants have souls. I don't know what you mean by that, GU. Like, let me know though, because that's interesting.
What I think is interesting too is there's kind of like a chunk of irony sitting underneath the whole thing too, because if we can be analytical and talk about the rocks don't literally have souls and so forth, but we do have mention in scripture that if the race of men would be silent to praise the Lord, the rocks would cry out.
Well, yeah.
How would they do so if God wouldn't endow them, right? So obviously it has something more than just the composite of the rocks. But again, he doesn't believe God's a person, and so none of this. That's what I mean. There's
nothing to latch on to. Like there's nothing to hang your hat on.
Hang the hat on.
Right.
It's not there. So as soon as he sees that God is person, that God is not a thing or an idea or a composition, God is a person, and he knows and can be known. He loves. He'll like to say God loves God loves everything. Speak of God as though he had a mind and intention, and then say everything to the contrary, like Dale's pointing out. It's like these ideas are like the ideas are not compatible where you're going. You know what I mean? And so it's very difficult to kind of, listen to and not see like there's intuitions that point to something, but he just does like I just don't think he has I don't think he has, like you were just saying. There's nowhere to put it. You know.
Right.
Well, boys, I hate to do this, but I got to run.
Get the frig out of here.
I love you guys. It's been fun.
So whenever I go on vacation, just y'all know, Faith Unaltered shows are only going to be an hour and a half. Bye.
All right, guys. I'll talk to you.
All right, bro.
Don't worry, though. I will be back. Bye, David.
I'll be back.
God. Well, at least he showed up instead of like Dane, who cancels on me last minute. Oh, I'm so tired. I've been moving all day. Man, get out of here with your nonsense. I love Dane. So Dane, but no, Dane is not number one anymore. I don't know who is, but Dane's not number one anymore. So
no.
Yeah, he lost it today. He's talking all week. I'm gonna be here. I want to do this episode. Then now, 30 minutes before we go live. Ah, man, I can't. I told him, I said, you're not number one. I hung up on him, too. He called me back begging. He did, I swear. Ask him. I'm not saying anything. Look, I would not lie here knowingly, okay? I might be, I might say some things that, aren't true, but it's accidentally, right? So, but I'm telling you straight up, I hung up on him, and then he called me back crying. No, he didn't cry, but anyway, he didn't cry. But anyway, Dale, I know you jumped in there. You was going to say something real quick. Go ahead.
I was just answering. G was asking a question about plants. Are they animate or not? What does that mean?
They interact, right? Like they interact. They do photosynthesis. But are they alive? Like do they have the spirit of God like breathed into them?
No,
I don't know. I don't think so.
Bible doesn't describe the word nefesh, right? And it doesn't do it to all animals. Only certain animals are nefesh or soulish animals. So that, according to the Bible, and this is it, I think the young earthers are correct about this article.
You heard it here first. Dell's a young earther now.
No, not the earth, but that they are correct that only certain animals are alive according to the biblical definition of living or animate.
Okay.
But according to the modern definition, they eat, they're self-replicating things. Yeah, plants are biologically alive according to the modern definition. They're animate according to the modern definition, but that doesn't necessarily cohere with the biblical definition of being alive. They're different definitions. So I would say biblically, plants are not living organisms. Biologically, according to the modern scientific definition, yes, they're alive.
This is interesting also. They have a nature that moves towards their God-given purpose. The acorn grows into the oak. I think that rather than saying it has a soul, I think that it has goodness. This is what God saw and said that it was good, is that things work as they ought in the proper order of God's intent. I just don't know how we would assign soulishness, unless you mean something else by soulishness than what Dale was describing, because it's entirely possible that what they mean by this is something different than what we're describing, and there's just kind of a dissonance of the idea. But if we say that plants have souls in the sense that plants are in any sense conscious or intentional, I would say probably not. Probably not. And I mean, there was a really interesting movie about this called The Happening. If anybody hasn't seen that, it's
a good movie.
It was interesting. It was interesting where the plants.
I like the thriller. Yeah.
The plants were. The plants were protesting. Yeah.
If I was acting, I couldn't do better than him. But still, that was not a good job.
Tag Mark Wahlberg in this and get his statement to Dell. We'll have an act off between Mark Wahlberg and Dell.
To quote Mark Wahlberg, no, don't do that.
No.
That's funny. All right. Well, guys, are we ready to move on to Professor Dave and maybe wrap up this show here in a minute?
Professor Dave, who satanically refused my offer to debate a flat earther on my show. And he told me he doesn't do debates on flat earther anymore.
And he did it.
I caught you, Professor Dave. You did it.
He did it. He debated Austin Whitsitt on some ridiculous moderator's channel. OMG, guys. Like, I'm not kidding. That wasn't a debate. at all. It was an informal dialogue, and Dale, I know we have difference in opinions on those semantics, but I'm just saying that was not a debate. The moderator should have shut up, like learn from us, shut up, and let the two debate. Now, I get it. If they're constantly interrupting each other, you got to step in. You got to drive the conversation. I get that. But dog, shut up while you're moderating. Like, please. Anyway.
I'm just going to go out on a limb and say Professor Dave, he is not biblically alive speaking. Yeah. either in a spiritual sense or the physical sense. He's a
just comatose, man. Well,
I'm just joking, Professor Dave.
he says some pretty cringy things, and so I did reach out. Now he hasn't seen it or anything, but I did say, look, if you want a fair moderator, like, and you want to debate any topic, I don't care. We'll host it, and like all of us, even if we're all moderating, or one of us. Like, we will be fair and stick to the times and stick to what y'all agreed on, because even during that debate, like, they changed it up. Like, the moderator said, well, do you guys want to do this now? Do you think you should have a 5-minute rebuttal? And they're like, Dave's like, no, let's stick to what we agreed with. So we won't try to change it up. But if you ever want a fair, neutral place, let me know. faithunaltered@gmail.com, and we'll make that happen. But okay, so this next clip then is from Professor Dave. He is critiquing the Billy Carson interview that was held on the Joe Rogan Experience. And so there's going to be clips from both, right? So Joe Rogan and Billy Carson are going to talk, and then Professor Dave's going to come on and give his critique. And we really could have did an episode on this entire video, but for copyright issues and all those things, and by the way, this shouldn't be copyrighted because of fair use, because we're taking these clips and we're making educational comments and, informal comments and critiquing these things. And so it shouldn't be copyrighted, but we'll see. And I've got that in the description. YouTube, I don't want to get demonetized, so I'll just keep it there. YouTube people, look in our comments, fair use. Anyway, so with that being said, like I said, this is Professor Dave critiquing Billy Carson. And yes, just if anybody in the audience is wondering, I had a Joe Rogan Experience like week to where I was listening to Joe Rogan podcast, and I heard these things. I was like, guys, we got to do a show on it. So anyway, so yes, that happened, and I'm ashamed of it. But here we are. Something good has come out of it, I think. So repent. Oh, well, I am. And I'm taking what I did wrong and now making it into something right. So
building a good ritual out of the evil one.
There you go. And by the way, I watched that episode. Spot on, guys. If you haven't watched the Cosmic Corner on beauty and rituals and just all of the things that go into that, like watch the new Cosmic Corner episode. Josh and Garrett, or no, Garrett wasn't on there. Josh, Spencer, Troy, and who else was on there with you?
Travis and Mike.
Yep. Awesome job. You guys, awesome job. Just go watch it. It speaks for itself. All right, Professor Dave, Billy Carson. Let's go.
Right, they were taking dictation from gods, because Billy says so. That's not at all an extraordinary statement, so it requires no evidence whatsoever. The Epic of Gilgamesh was dictation from gods, a very obvious myth about kings and heroes and adventures, just like any other myth from any other civilization, which holds no transcendent or relevant information about anything, has to be dictation from gods, because reasons.
So when you're reading things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, for people who don't know, is one of the oldest versions of a lot of the stories that you hear in the Bible. Very similar to them. There always seems to be a great flood. There's a few heroes. There's angry gods. There's a bunch of stuff going on.
Joe said something smart. Ancient Mesopotamian myths were recycled to develop Hebrew mythology, something most Christians don't know and don't want to know. But more importantly, he just totally dismantled the dumb thing that Billy said, and neither of them pick up on it.
So, let me agree with that last part, and then completely, absolutely despise everything he just said other than that very last part, right? No, they didn't. Because, and David alluded to this earlier, I really think. if you have a bunch of different cultures that are, I don't know, telling a similar story, and they're all alluding to the historicity of this story, like, I don't know, a great flood. I'm just saying, maybe it's not myth, maybe it's history that stems from an original source, because that's the claim. You have a flood that, from my understanding, can be argued that this happened during the Younger Dryas period. Shout out to Y-Files, who we just critiqued, but I learned something from them. But if you're interested in that, check out the Younger Dryas. That's a very interesting claim. But anyway, the point is that why does this idea of an ancient flood, and we're going to look at similarities and differences between ancient Mesopotamian mythology, as Dave calls it, and Hebrew mythology. And you're going to find out really quick that the two are so far apart, like they're on different ends of the spectrum here. Okay, they have a similarity. They have a flood story. That makes sense to me, that flood story, if how the Bible describes it is true, if how all these different cultures, that you have one guy that survived, that repopulated the earth, that these different, or that story would be handed down. I mean, I'm just saying it makes sense, right? Like, am I the only one in this that agrees with that? Because, I mean, go ahead, Josh.
I was gonna say, if you have people with, okay, imagine, and we have a hard time conceptualizing this, except for the people who are, a little older than ourselves. Before the internet, before telephones, before radios and TVs, people didn't have contact with each other. Gasp. Guess what? The guys who wrote one thing didn't write another thing. It was very difficult. And to be honest with you, stories that old weren't written in the way that we're thinking of writing at this point anyway. They were told. They were recorded, but they weren't written like Dale pointed out earlier. They're not didactic texts with a list of dogmas and a historical continuity from one idea to another. Even some of the later things that people have constructed that are very legendary. If you read I don't know if anybody who's listening has read the Arthurian legends. You can make an interesting story of them, but they are not linear, right? Like they're not exactly made to be linear. They're episodic. You know what I mean? And so a lot of the things that are recorded in ancient mythologies are episodic and not linear in the way that we want them or expect them to be in the first place. And yet the scripture opens up and is from the beginning remarkably linear. And so you get this, and this is what Lewis called the pagans having good dreams, right? But then God comes along with an explicit revelation to the people of Abraham, and wonderful. That's wonderful, right? But it's like, why would there then be skepticism because there's overlap? If you had peer-reviewed science, the overlap is actually the reliability rather than a disqualifier. So it's just a weird cynicism that's guiding his thinking here.
Dale, any comment before we get into similarities and differences?
Well, I think it might be best. Let's. My point's related to the similarities and differences, but it's kind of countering this point of dependence, like the assumption that the Bible is dependent on these pagan myths. Actually, we can prove historically the opposite is true. The pagan myths copied the Bible, and we can prove it. Where do you think that fits better?
Let's jump into the similarities and differences, and then you can bring up that point.
Okay, cool.
All right. So with that being said, I did some research and spent an interesting amount of time listening to things like Enuma Elish, Epic of Gilgamesh, looking at the different hymns that we have from the cuneiform. Now, I'm not going to be as bold as Billy Carson to say, yeah, guys, you can read the cuneiform online. Yeah, that's true, but I don't know cuneiform. I'm relying on different scholars who have translated these texts. But here's the thing that I've noticed, and I've wrote them down here, so let me just read what I've got here, and I think we'll see very, very soon that, yeah, there are some similarities, but it's not what y'all might think it is. So the first one we've got, creation stories. Both mythologies have creation narratives. In Sumerian mythology, the story of the creation of the world and humanity is depicted in texts like the Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis, epic. Hebrew mythology presents its creation story in the book of Genesis. So there's creation stories, guys. Whoa. Divine beings are another similarity. So both mythologies feature pantheons of gods and goddesses with distinct roles and powers. In Sumerian mythology, prominent deities include Anu, Enlil, and Inanna. Hebrew mythology includes figures such as Yahweh, angels, and supernatural beings like cherubim and seraphim. Number 3, flood stories. Both cultures have the flood myth. The Sumerian flood story appears in the Epic of Atrahasis, and a similar tale is found in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In Hebrew mythology, the flood story is recounted in the story of Noah's Ark. All right, so far we've got creation, divine beings, and the flood. All right, what's next? Cosmology. Both mythologies share a similar cosmological outlook, viewing the universe as ordered and under divine control. They depict a hierarchical structure within the divine realm above and the earthly realm below. All right. Number 5, ethical teachings. Did y'all know Sumerian mythology actually had moral teachings found within it? Crazy, right? Bastards. Both mythologies contain moral teachings and guidelines for human behavior, often conveyed through stories and laws. For instance, the Code of Hammurabi in Sumerian culture and in the Mosaic Law in Hebrew culture provide ethical and a legal framework. And guys, that's it. That's it. So we have creation story, we have divine beings, we have similar cosmology in the sense that divine beings rule in a hierarchical sense the heavens, and earthly humans in a hierarchical sense rule the earthly realm. We have flood stories, or a flood story, I should say, and we have ethical teachings. Something you can find in literally every pagan religion. So I just don't see it, right? Like, I don't understand how these similarities specifically can, like, Christians don't want to know about this. Like, yeah, we do. Like, this is something we love because it's not like what Professor Dave is kind of making out to be. Like, there's not this idea that we copied one for one. There's not an idea, and Dale's going to show this here in a minute, that there is this idea that, we copied it all, right?
Right.
But now, let's get into some details about the actual differences, because I found this is what, in my opinion, separates Hebrew mythology from this cosmological pantheon of gods that the Sumerians believed in, right? And so let me pull my notes up real quick. Okay, so the very first thing right off the bat, monotheism versus polytheism. So ancient Hebrews, their central belief is in monotheism, with Yahweh as the one true God. There is no other gods. We see this in Deuteronomy. We see this in Exodus. We see this all throughout the law. The earliest portion of the Hebrew text that we have, the Bible, the Old Testament, it all starts out one God, not many. There's one. The nature of the gods. Ancient Hebrews, Yahweh is considered omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, with a personal, Josh, there you go, God's a person, and moral nature. He interacts directly with humans, but in ancient Sumerians mythology, gods and goddesses are anthropomorphic. beings with human-like emotions, flaws, and behaviors. They often intervene in human affairs and possess specific domains of influence. See the Enuma of Leash. We actually have jealous and gods that kill each other over their jealousy. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the flood story, because Enlil was annoyed by the humans making too much noise on the earth. That's why he decided to come flood it. Enki comes and warns who we would call Noah, and that's how the flood myth. So the only similarities is really one guy and a flood, and that's about it. The reason God floods the earth, Yahweh floods the earth, is because of sin, not because people are being too loud. Shocker. The third, cosmology and creation. So now we're going to get into, they believed that in gods that interacted and a God that interacted, and then a hierarchical structure in the heavens and a hierarchical structure here on earth. But here's the difference. Creation is portrayed in a singular event in Hebrew mythos, right? It's portrayed as a singular event initiated by Yahweh, who creates the world and everything in it out of nothing, ex nihilo. Humans are created in the image of God, but with the ancient Sumerians, creation stories involve multiple gods collaborating and conflicting in the creation of the world and humanity. And by the way, it's not ex nihilo. It's not out of nothing. They're all using things that was already there. And the stories like Enuma Elish don't really tell you how they got there. It just kind of leaves it open-ended. So I don't know. But anyway, creation is often depicted as a result of divine conflict and natural processes. Now, I don't know the exact story with the Sumerians, but I know, for example, and I'm not trying to get over PG here, but if y'all have younger ones, I'm going to try to make this as not gross as I can. But according to the ancient Egyptians, sexual activity was used to create the earth, really. There's also differences in like, or there's also like blood. It's usually like a bodily fluid in pagan mythos that somehow, some way sets into motion the creation of the earth and the universe. So that's a complete difference right there. Number 4, relationship between gods and humanity. According to the ancient Hebrews, Yahweh establishes covenantal relationship with humanity, particularly with the Israelites, based on obedience and faithfulness. Prophets act as intermediaries between Yahweh and the people. Ancient Sumerians, on the other hand, humans serve and appease the gods through rituals, offerings, and prayer to gain favor or avoid punishment. And guess what, guys? Sometimes it don't always work out. You can pray and pray and pray and pray, but if you're a fatalistic religion, hey, whatever's going to happen to you is going to happen to you anyway. Don't matter what kind of prayers you pray, don't matter what kind of rituals you do, you're still going to get what's coming to you. You're still going to get what has been decreed and fated by the fates or the gods. And sorry, and sometimes, like we see on Mount Carmel with Elijah specifically, what happens? You see all these people calling out to the god, right? It's Baal. And they say, Baal, come down, smote this. They were having a contest, for those who aren't familiar with the story, that whoever can have their god basically call fire from heaven and light an offering. Yep. They had bulls. They cut them up, put them on the altar. Whoever could do that, that would show that their God was the true God, right? And you see the 400 priests of Baal calling night and day, calling, and nothing happens. And so just because you do something doesn't necessarily mean the God's going to respond. And that was a big part of the ancient Sumerians. That's why they tried, but that's all they could really do is try. Number 5, afterlife and eschatology. This is where we touched on earlier. The ancient Hebrews, early Hebrew beliefs in the afterlife were initially vague, according to the Bible, with a focus on the importance of life on earth and a place called Sheol, where all souls, good or bad, would go after death and await resurrection and final judgment. See Job 19:25 through 27. Psalm 48:15 through 16 in the Septuagint, Isaiah 26:19, and Daniel 12:2. But the ancient Sumerians, on the other hand, believed in the underworld, Kur, where souls of the dead went after life. The afterlife was a gloomy existence without the vibrancy of earthly life. And so not at all what, and as we described earlier, in what the Jews thought specifically about eternal punishment, there's a complete difference. And so you take the vague kind of similarities between the ancient Hebrews and the ancient Sumerians, right, in Mesopotamian religion, and you see, yeah, there's a little bit of overlap there, but then you get into the differences, which is what I believe sets all of these things apart, and sets both of these religions on complete different ends of the spectrum, that you cannot say, Professor Dave, that they copied or that they recycled these myths. There's too many differences, and I just listed the top 5. There's more. There's a lot more to it. But that's really it. You don't get this notion that would somehow like just surprise Christians that, well, yeah, there's some overlap here, but it's not enough to really mean anything. There's nothing in the overlap that makes me have this like crisis of faith or like, oh my God, what happened here? You know, like there's nothing like that. And so with that being said, Dale, I know you wanted to jump into proof that, you know, these other religions actually copied from Hebrew mythology. So go ahead.
Yeah. So, okay. So just before I make that point, I just have a quick, and it'll be within fair use, for a quick 4-minute clip of Dr. William Lane Craig's great.
No more. I'm the only one allowed to show clips.
Well, I think this will be really helpful. And
it's 4 minutes. That's going to get us into copyright territory. Dale, come on.
Are you sure? Because
yes.
I've never had any issues with it. Fine. Okay.
Dale's gone. Well, with that being said, guys, no, I'm just playing. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. Play the clip.
I've never had issues with William Lane Craig, so
fair use, right?
Let us use it, Bill.
Come on, Bill.
I got Hugh Ross on for you, Bill. So, yeah. All right. So this is, yep. Okay. 4-minute clip.
Last time that too many Old Testament scholars have succumbed to the affliction of parallelomania. That is to say, trying to show that one narrative is dependent upon another by examining details taken out of context. And this results in cherry picking that can be very misleading in demonstrating alleged independence. Now, just this week in my reading, I encountered a paradigm example of this sort of cherry picking. In his book, Creation Accounts in the Ancient Near East and the Bible, Richard Clifford has this to say about the relationship between the Epic of Gilgamesh and Genesis 1-11. He says, such kaleidoscopic reuse of traditional materials may seem strange to modern readers, but ancient authors evidently liked to put familiar objects in new contexts. Now here, Clifford actually appears to endorse cherry picking. That is to say, comparing details of narratives without appeal to their context. And he gives as his example certain details in the story of Gilgamesh. Now, by way of background, Gilgamesh was a warrior king who was able to defeat every challenger that came against him. And the gods made for Gilgamesh a close companion and aide named Enkidu, who was originally a hairy wild man that became then a bosom friend of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh and Enkidu were, if you will, the Tom Brady and Julian Edelman of Mesopotamian mythology. Now, Clifford draws the following parallel between the Gilgamesh story and Genesis. The naked and animal-like Enkidu acquires wisdom from his 7-day dalliance with a prostitute. Afterward, she clothes him and leads him to the city of Uruk and its king, Gilgamesh. Okay, that's the account in Gilgamesh. I'll reread that. The naked and animal-like Enkidu acquires wisdom from his 7-day dalliance with a prostitute. Afterwards, she clothes him and leads him to the city of Uruk and its king Gilgamesh. All right, you ready for this? Here's the parallel with Genesis. Genesis rearranges these same traditions to describe the institution of marriage. Now, this is parallelomania.
Okay, so I think you get the point about this main problem that I wanted to talk about in terms of parallelomania. So that's the first problem, right? Is that they're pointing to parallels that aren't actually parallels in the first place. And then the second point I want to make is the point that Tyler was mentioning, right? Is that sometimes even when there are parallels, the skeptic just assumes that it's the Bible that's copying the pagan, when actually we have proof historically the opposite is the case. So again, going with this epic of Gilgamesh, in terms of the flood legend, for example, we can prove that the oldest versions of this Gilgamesh story, it doesn't have a flood story. The flood isn't in it. It's just completely absent. Now, there is Tyler was talking about the older Sumerian Mesopotamian poem called Atrahasis, which does have a flood account that's dramatically different from the flood account in the Bible. And guess what? Gilgamesh obviously has borrowed elements from and was dependent upon this Atrahasis account. But there are certain elements that are unique only to the book of Genesis. So, for example, the story about Noah and the birds, his using the birds to see if the flood is subsiding and stuff like sorry?
Oh, I just say, yep. Like he uses a raven and then he uses a dove.
Yeah. So that's not in the Mesopotamian versions at all. It's not in the Atrahasis story. It's in Genesis, which predates the modern version of Epic of Gilgamesh, which has this flood legend. So actually we can prove the Epic of Gilgamesh is copying the Bible and taking these details and combining it with the Sumerian version of the flood. And this is what scholars have discovered, right? So it's actually, we can prove the opposite. The fact that the Epic of Gilgamesh is copying the Bible. It's not the Bible copying the Epic of Gilgamesh or anything like this. So that was my 2 points there.
That's it. And I think that's a really good point, is that a lot of these stories, the way we have them in modern, usage and in modern text, they're not like, we don't have, and this is something interesting that I found during my study of this, is that most of the things we have are fragmentary of, like, yes, we have multiple texts, right? But they're fragmentary, and what we use is a lot of, I forget the technical term for it off the top of my head, but basically there's like a lot of blank lines, and scholars can kind of assume from like other stories and other things found at this, like what that would say, but it's not word for word, and it's a combination of all of these different sources combined to get the account, right, to what scholars think they were. Now, maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but this is just the scholar's best guess. And I'm not saying like there's any reason to doubt, but keep in mind that what we don't have from Sumeria is what we have for the New Testament. We have 5,800 plus Greek manuscripts, some full codexes and other full Bibles that were, that stem back to the 4th century. We don't have that in Sumeria mythology. We have fragmentary pieces of pottery and tablets and all these different things that are used to combine and get the best guess of what these stories actually said. So to say that, well, we know for certain, that's just blatantly false. We don't know. We're guessing and we're assuming. Yes, they're educated guesses. Absolutely. I won't deny that by any stretch of the imagination. But there are still guesses. We don't have what we do with the New Testament, for example, which is why people like Daniel B. Wallace, for example, will say that the New Testament is the most authentic and best attested to historical document that we have, because we have so many copies of the text that we can look back and say, yep, this is what the Bible said. So anyway,
yeah, it's just amazing. Yeah, like I said, this is coming from scholars that I'm quoting and stuff like that, and they know that this whole flood legend in the Epic of Gilgamesh post dates 750 BC. So it's after the biblical account was already written, and that's according to leftist liberal, not hyper liberal, but at least critical liberal scholars will admit this. So yeah, we know for a fact if you claim the Epic of Gilgamesh copied the Bible copied the Epic of Gilgamesh for the flood legend, wrong answer. We've proven it's the opposite.
So I'm going to take a line from you, Dale, and I think you'll be proud of me. So here we go. Professor Dave, you're just wrong.
Exactly. I'm right. You're wrong.
I'm right. You're wrong. Get over it. But you're just wrong. So stop giving your millions of followers false information. Do the research, figure it out, and actually say something, and I don't get me wrong, like I like what Professor Dave does with flat earth and all these other different things like that. But whenever it comes to Christianity, it's just like he doesn't give it as much, due. And maybe that's because he thinks it's bogus, whatever. But like you'll research flat earth, but not give the same amount to Christianity. Like, and if you think we're wrong, doors open, bud. Come on, let's discuss it. So anyway, with that being said, any closing remarks, guys? Like, that's all the clips that I have. What did you guys think? Did you like doing this? Like, was this a fun episode for y'all?
Yes.
For me, it kind of continues on with the spirit of David Russell's deconversion things, right? So, this was popular on my channel, and I'm assuming it's popular on Faith Unaltered. I can see back 24, and that's actually dropped from where it was. So, it seems like I think this is helpful for people, and like, okay, what are real world complaints or objections to Christianity, and how do we respond to it? So,
I hope it is, because we need people like this, right? We need people that's willing to stand up and say, hey, look, I know you're popular, but popularity isn't always true, right? So just because so-and-so says it, and I like what Professor Dave said with Billy Carson, just because Billy says it makes it true? Okay, now take that standard and apply it to yourself. You don't give any sources. You don't do anything that you accused Billy of not doing, rightly so. Like, I agree, Billy should have had sources. But Dave, so should you. And that's what we've done. We've brought the sources to the table to show you that you're wrong. So please admit that. And for our audience, get this to people like Dave, like Joe, like Y-Files, like AJ. And I've tagged them in it, so hopefully they will see it. But push this content out there to where they have to look at it and say, hey, look, deal with these claims that we're making, because what you guys are saying is just patently false. Just stop. Anyway, Josh, I saw you on mute.
I was gonna say I enjoyed this conversation. I like doing these clip responses, and I think it's good too, because so far almost every time we've done these clip responses, they're clips that I haven't yet watched all the way through.
Okay,
and so I'm genuinely hearing them for the first time and kind of reacting to them just like one of the audience would if they were hearing this for the first time and going, what in the world? You know what I mean? And so I think it's useful when we're on here and we're actively thinking through it. Like that's what I like. That's what I like about it, is because
I'll just say same for me, Josh. It's I literally found out about the show 10 minutes before the show, so I've never seen these clips or anything. So like, yeah, it's good. Okay, what do you say on the spot? Like, I don't have prepared notes like Mr. Tyler up here with his 5 organized points. Or maybe that's just off the top of his head. Maybe you're a genius. I don't know.
he's oh yeah, there it is. There's a cheat sheet.
Fast typer? I don't know.
Really, yeah, no, he's got the quick thumbs. I think, and you know what the other thing that I can say is I'm pleased. And then I'm also was laughing my butt off when Dale said that he was not pleased. That was hilarious. And also, just now, a couple of minutes ago, and the audience should mark their calendars, I just heard Dale invoke the spirit of David Russell. That was hilarious.
That's interesting.
That was. And so this is a monumental episode. We're just doing all kinds of things here.
I've got to re-listen to that because I've totally forgotten what that was about. I said that I invoked the
yeah,
spirit of David Russell.
You did. You said I like this episode because it was in the spirit of David Russell. And with continuity.
Oh yeah, you did. Because that's right. Because of how we did this.
You've been watching Cosmic Corner, haven't you?
I think so. Yeah, you're rubbing off.
That's funny. All right, guys. Well, that does it for this episode of Faith Unaltered. Thank you all for hanging out with us. This is my last episode for the month of July. I know we're in June, but I'm taking the month of July off, and I'm going to need some much-needed prayers. And I'm going to record an audiobook for Craig Trulia. I hope to get that done during this time off and spend some much-needed time with my family. So with that being said, y'all have a... Go ahead.
Just for Real Seekers announcements, I can never let it go. So yeah, but just for Real Seekers announcements, because Faith Unaltered will care on Wednesday, July the 3rd. It'll be a joint show, Real Seekers and Faith Unaltered. Dr. Shabir Ali, we're scheduled to have him on. Hopefully no more postponements, but we'll finally be doing the debate on the evidence for the crucifixion of Jesus versus what it says in Surah 4, Ayah 157. Then on Friday at 10 a.m., I'm bringing on Otangelo Grasso to talk about his new book on the fine-tuning argument for God, fine-tuning of the universe, as well as the cosmological argument, stuff like that. And then on Saturday at noon on Real Seekers, I'm bringing on Tyler Vela to discuss, some of his reasons for deconversion, but also discussing some of the positive evidences, like the evidence for the resurrection, the Shroud of Turin, and how do we put that all together to see if he should believe or disbelieve, kind of thing. So that's everything next week.
When you're on there, tell him I'm ready with my free will. Did the early church believe in libertarian free will?
I will. I'll tell him.
Whenever I get back, let's schedule that. So, all right. Josh, any announcements?
Just that the next month in Tyler's absence, we'll probably have more than one Cosmic Corner episode. So I'm going to see what I can do. Try to aim at a couple of different things that I think would be really useful. One of them being probably exploring inverse rituals, especially in relation to some of the things we were talking about today. I think that would be wildly appropriate. So yeah, maybe we'll do a follow-up episode to the identity and ritual episode that we just did. So
fun.
That's what I'm thinking so far. I have a couple other things in mind, but might do more than one.
Fun stuff. Looking forward to that. And I'm hoping, and so no, I've not put off the Patreon for those who are interested in that. I'm ran into some difficulties that I'm going to take the month to try to figure this out, and hopefully before I come back, we'll have a Patreon up, and so people that want to donate to us monthly will do that, and are able to do that. It's not that I've been putting it off. I've looked into it, but I've ran into a difficulty, and so hopefully David and I can figure that out soon. So with that being said, y'all have a wonderful night. Thank you for hanging out with us. If you'd like to donate to our cause, links are down in the description. Just go to our link tree and you'll see the donate tab. But we love you all, and we thank you for hanging out with us tonight. And so until we meet again, good night, God bless, and know that you are loved.